And we're live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. Taking a look at the warnings map, you can see once again we've got a lot to talk about, especially over here in the southeast, working up all the way even into the mid-Atlantic, where some of that severe weather that we had yesterday in Mississippi and Alabama that caused, I believe, a couple dozen tornadoes and widespread destruction, that is now going to be moving east. And that tornado threat is now stretching from Florida all the way up to very southeastern parts of Virginia. And on this map, you can actually see that tornado watch there. But if we look at the Storm Prediction Center, you can actually see that the probability of tornadoes stretches all the way from West Virginia and Virginia all the way down here into Florida, with the key bullseye being there in South Carolina and North Carolina. So that I think is the big story that we're going to be talking about today. If I had to sum it up, I would say the overall weather setup isn't looking as bad as it was yesterday. Yesterday for Mississippi and Alabama, that was about as bad as a severe weather outlook can look. I would say it's diminished a little bit. It seems to have lost some energy, a little bit of organization, but the threat does still continue, so that is the key thing that we'll be talking about today. Then we'll also be mentioning what's going on here in the western parts of the country. There you see the winter storm warning starting to pop up, especially for Northern California. So we'll dive into that as well, because there is another storm on the horizon that'll be coming in possibly even today. We'll just have to wait and see what that local map is saying. So the big story, though, is obviously that severe weather going on from the southeast, and as you'll see, stretching all the way up into the mid-Atlantic. That's the low right there that was bringing those tornadoes to Mississippi and Alabama yesterday. And you'll watch as that just moves across the region. And the first thing you notice is, at first glance, it certainly does not look as bad as it looked yesterday. Yesterday, we had these severe thunderstorms popping up over the entire southeast. Now it looks like, it just looks like a lot of that energy has diminished. But we will dive into the local maps, because there are some locations where that tornado threat and the threat for extreme winds and hail does still exist. Now, something else you'll notice on this map, and something that we will be diving into, is this snow that's actually going to be popping up in the mid-Atlantic, stretching up into southern New England. And that is a combination of the moisture from this low pressure system, the moisture pulling up from the Gulf of Mexico that's creating all this severe weather, mixing with some cold air from that high pressure system you see right there. So there's actually a surprising little chance for snow in southern New England that some previous forecast models weren't expecting. And then on the far left of the screen here, you can see that storm start to work into the Pacific Northwest. That's going to bring widespread rain to the coasts of Washington, Oregon, California, and then even some snow to the Cascades and the Sierras. Now, if I had to sum up this storm, I wouldn't say it looks like a very large storm by any standards, but it's lasting long enough that some of our totals are going to get up to over an inch of rain and then over a foot of snow in some locations. And we will be looking at that. But again, first, we want to just be focusing on the severe weather that's going on in the southeast. You can actually see it on this map. I can go back here and you can actually see the moisture pulling into the region. And if you look closely enough, you can actually see some of what appears to be some of those thunderstorms popping up. So that is that organized strip of moisture and severe weather that's, you can see, is currently moving over Florida, Georgia, into South Carolina, North Carolina, and then in Virginia. So you can see how that moisture is just being pushed up into this region as it rotates around this low pressure. Now, the good news is after that main wall of moisture and severe weather moves through, behind it, it's more normal, just some clouds, not the extreme severe thunderstorms that we've been getting. And that's especially good news for Alabama right there, as they certainly had their fair share of severe weather yesterday. So looking at this is called the sandwich. It's a better way to see some of the strongest storms and where some of those thunderstorms are. You can see where you see that red color. That indicates where there's some stronger convection going on, and that is likely to just get stronger throughout the day today. As we start to bring in more warm air, as we start to bring in more moisture, we're most likely going to see more of these severe thunderstorms pop up, especially through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then again all working all the way up into Virginia. And it's a combination of what creates this tornado threat. One, it's the warm air pushing into the region, but it's also the moisture, and that might actually be the even more important part of it, because that has big influences on the energy of the system, and then all that hail and rainfall that can fall as well. And here you can actually see that moisture pulling right into where we're seeing that line of thunderstorms lining up right there. You can see that moisture, the water vapor just being pulled into the system and rotating around that low pressure system. Now behind it, as I was mentioning, once you use up all that moisture, then behind it is mostly dry air. So that's good news for Alabama today. They had quite a number of tornadoes yesterday, so it's good to see that right now the atmosphere above them is looking fairly dry. So there's not going to be as much of a threat for any of those thunderstorms or tornadoes occurring today on top of what they already got yesterday. I believe there was even one town that got hit by 2 tornadoes back to back. So my thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who's living in that region. So just to sum up again, as this low pressure system rotates, pulls that moisture in, pulls that warm air in, it's that rising warm moist air where that rises into a thunderstorm. That's what actually creates the possibility of tornadoes. So that's why it's so important to look at where the moisture and the warm air is. So it's also important just to look at the snapshot of where this Storm Prediction Center is saying the greatest risks are, and this is showing just the greatest risks of severe weather in general. And you can see we have the moderate risk of severe weather stretching all the way from the very southern portions of Virginia through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and then some of those limited impacts stretching all the way into Florida. We can actually see the yellow is slight, orange is enhanced, and then the red is the moderate risk. And moderate is a little bit deceiving because it doesn't sound like all that bad of a thing, but moderate is number 4 out of 5 on their severity scale. It goes moderate and then to high. So to see that moderate risk there in South Carolina and North Carolina, that's the key spot where we're going to want to look out today. Now that's also the key spot when it comes to the probability of tornadoes. That red right there, that means there's a 15% chance of tornadoes. The yellow means there's 10% chance. And then the brown stretching all the way from the Virginias to Florida. That's where there is the 5% chance of tornadoes. So you can see the greatest chance of tornadoes is here, especially through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, with that bullseye right there, right between North and South Carolina. And then you probably noticed that little check marks within this yellow shading, where it almost looks like there's little checkerboards. That means that the Storm Prediction Center is predicting that there is the possibility of strong tornadoes forming. So whenever you see those little check marks there, that's a good sign to pay extra close attention, and not to take my word for it, go to your local resources and see what they're saying if you live in this area where you see those checked off boxes there. So there's also another part of the severe weather story is what's going on with the hail. So with severe weather, there's just severe weather in general with those thunderstorms. But with those thunderstorms, you can get 1, tornadoes, 2, you can get hail. You can see the chances of hail going from West Virginia and Virginia all the way down to Florida. And then the third thing you can get are those extreme winds. And we'll be taking a closer look at that in some of the local forecasts when we get into that. But you can see the greatest threat for wind damage is here from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then again stretching just into the very southern parts of Virginia. And some of the gusts we're going to see are in the 40 to 60 mile per hour range when it comes to some of those wind gusts. And then that's just the overall flow. you can think of around, if you were to get a tornado, that's where your wind gusts get up to maybe 80, 100, or unfortunately even more than 100 miles per hour at some points. So what's causing all this severe weather is this cut-off low pressure system, and I purposely went back a little bit so you could see how strong this was when it moved through Mississippi and Alabama yesterday. You can actually see how close those lines are together, and that gives you a good indication of how strong the winds are going to be, how much moisture and warm air you're going to be pulling into the region, which creates the risk for, or it's part of what creates the risk for those tornadoes and thunderstorms forming. So you can see how strong that was and how organized and condensed it was as it moved over Mississippi and Alabama yesterday. That's what I was saying about how that setup yesterday looked just about as bad as it could get when it comes to severe weather. Now, when we look at today, you'll notice that those lines are still close together. So the threat for severe weather does still exist. We're still going to be pulling in that warm, moist air that promotes thunderstorms, but it doesn't look as bad as yesterday. So I guess that's the silver lining. Even though it certainly still looks like a strong storm and it's currently moving through and creating the threat for tornadoes in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, it at least doesn't look as bad as it did as it was going through Mississippi and Alabama yesterday. That's quite strong. Now, still strong, but not as bad. So, just looking at the precipitation that's associated with that low as it moves through, you can see right about now, we're just going to be starting to see those scattered thunderstorms showing up throughout the region. That actually almost matches that visible we were looking at earlier, where you see that stretch of where those thunderstorms are popping up, going through Florida, through eastern parts of Georgia, and then up through South Carolina, and then actually stretching all the way up into the Midwest and Northeast as well. So the best way to understand what's happening here, so there you see the low pressure system, and the reason it's creating this threat for severe weather is, again, like I said, it's bringing in warm air and it's bringing moist air. That's what gives the energy to these thunderstorms, and you can actually see that on this map. So if we go back here, this is the morning, so it's another reason it's rather cool. We're in, it's not exactly cool, we're still in the mid 50s and 60s, even though it's 5 a.m. in the morning. And then as we get into this afternoon, you can see how this works. There's the low pressure there. It has counterclockwise rotation around it, and you can actually see the winds pulling in these warm temperatures that you see with that red color there. So that's one box that's being checked. It's pulling in that warm air, getting us into the mid 70s to even the 80s in exactly those same places where we have the threats for severe weather. Through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, that's right where this low is bringing in that warm air. The other thing it's bringing in is the moisture. So we'll go back again and watch where the moisture is condensed on this graph. You can see right behind it, behind all those thunderstorms that we were talking about earlier, that's where you have the dry air because you just squeezed out a bunch of the moisture. So you can almost think of this line of thunderstorms as almost like a sponge that's just getting squeezed, and then it continues to move east, and when it does, that makes it so it's drier behind the system. You squeeze out the moisture and then it moves east. So right where we're currently squeezing out the moisture and into this afternoon and this evening as well is right in that strip where we are expecting the severe weather through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then working up into Virginia. You can see that's the strip where that moisture is being pulled in, and then behind it, after that moisture has already been squeezed out, that's where the dry air follows in behind it. So again, that's great news for Mississippi and Alabama. They certainly had their share of severe weather yesterday, so it's good to see some drier air being pulled in from places like Texas and Oklahoma. So the good thing to look at here is just the individual regions. So we're first going to look down here in the southeast, then we're going to look a little farther north up into Virginia, and then we're going to look all the way up into the northeast where there's actually going to be some snow associated with this same system. So I think the story for this system is just the numerous effects that it's been causing. Yesterday, In the forecast yesterday, we were talking about in Texas, this same low pressure system was causing a blizzard warning in the Panhandle, a wildfire warning down in the southern parts of the state. We had the tornado threats throughout Mississippi and Alabama, and then we had a flash flood threat throughout Missouri. Today, that threat for severe thunderstorms and severe weather is moving onto the east coast, and then up here in the northeast, we actually have the possibility of some snow while there's high winds in the Midwest. So this storm has really been creating all kinds of different warnings for all kinds of different parts of the country. So just looking in here, we can watch those thunderstorms as they go through. That was yesterday. You can see what was directly over Alabama, even getting into the nighttime hours as we had some tornadoes there. And then that is almost just moving like a line across the southeast and then bringing those tornadoes, just like we were talking about, almost in an organized line, and then behind it, that's where the dry air will fill in. So that's looking at this afternoon, and then by this evening, and especially into tonight, those storms should finally exit the region and give the southeast a bit of a break. So we can look at the supercell composite. This is looking at early this morning, and then as we get into this afternoon, you can see that it's not widespread like it was yesterday. Yesterday it seemed like this supercell composite was covering this entire region. Now you see it looks like there's just isolated regions, especially within Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, where we see these severe thunderstorms or supercells starting to pop up. And then because that moisture is being pulled north from the Gulf of Mexico, you'll notice some of those spreading up north as well, getting into South Carolina and then North Carolina as we get into this afternoon and then into tonight. You can see around 2 to 3 to 4 is when we're really going to have to start to think about South Carolina and North Carolina. As you can see, those supercells are likely to be happening there. And then that is finally going to be exiting the region by sometime tonight. The exact timing we'll look at in a second. First, I would just want to show the total rainfall we're getting with this one. Overall, not that much rain. It's 0.2, 0.4 inches. That's nothing compared to this region, where in some forecast videos we're talking about 5 to 6 inches of rain. And this actually makes sense when you think about it, because it just looks like very scattered thunderstorms coming through. So it's not one giant system moving slowly over the region, just pouring down rain for a long period of time. It's these little tiny isolated thunderstorms that are going to drop large amounts of rain over a short period of time and then quickly exit the region. So that's not going to add up to your totals as much as just a slow moving large system. What it does do though is generate the risk for those tornadoes and makes it very difficult to identify exactly where those tornadoes are going to be. The other thing going on in this region is the high winds associated with this storm as it goes through. You can almost see the cold front right there, the storms that are lining up. And with those, just like how they're isolated and scattered storms, we also have these isolated and scattered pockets of extreme wind, where we're getting 35 to even 50 mile per hour wind gusts at some points as this storm moves through, especially through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina there. It's good to see that although we still have gusts 24 to 25 miles per hour in parts of Alabama, which certainly still significant, it's at least great to see we don't still have 50 to 60 mile per hour gusts like we did yesterday. So you can see those wind gusts will be continuing throughout the day today, and then right there you can see it finally move off the coast, which will be great news for everyone. Now we can actually look at the exact timing of this. So about 10 a.m. this morning to 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., you can see those isolated thunderstorms starting to move through Georgia. And then as we get into this afternoon, that's where we're starting to bring more of that warm air and moisture in. So that's where we're going to start to have to really look out for some of these cells. You can't really tell exactly what's going to happen based on these forecast maps. These are things that you really have to just follow in real time, but we can at least see where they're expected to come in as of right now, especially through that eastern part of Georgia and then working up into South Carolina and then eventually up into North Carolina, which we'll look at in a second. So clearly thunderstorms have already started. Now let's just see when they're going to be gone. Looks like at about 9 p.m. tonight, they're expected to be exiting the region. Again, never take my word for it. Stay updated with your local resources because, as we've seen in many of these forecast videos, forecast models can be wrong. So just to re-emphasize there what we were just looking at, where we just saw some of those thunderstorms going through Georgia and South Carolina, that is where there is the expectation for some strong tornadoes forming. That's designated by that hashed mark there within the yellow, which signifies a 10% chance of tornado formation throughout that region. You can see where it's actually even stronger, though, is as you get farther up into North Carolina, and then it even extends almost all the way into Virginia. So we should actually try to see that as it happens on this map. So right there, that basically sums up how large this storm was yesterday. You could think of this as showing storm energy. Whenever you see a blue color like that, that indicates a strong storm. And that was almost directly over Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama yesterday. Then throughout the day today, you can see that some of that strength is going to start to pop back up this afternoon as we bring in some of that warm air and moisture, and that is going to actually move directly over North Carolina. So I'm expecting to see some strong winds in that region as that storm goes through. We can see the thunderstorms and some of the severe weather it's going to bring as we look at the precipitation type and rate. And again, it's difficult to identify exactly where those thunderstorms are going to be. It's just going to be scattered throughout the states in North Carolina and Virginia where we have that tornado warning. It's as we go from this morning into this afternoon and then into this evening, as that system moves over the region, that's where we get the threat for severe weather. So we can also look at the supercell composite. I think this actually paints a better picture than that last one we were just looking at. You can see how these are moving north. So let's just go back to the beginning, just in case you missed that. Think of the moisture being pulled in from the Gulf of Mexico here and that warm air that promotes these thunderstorms popping up into South Carolina, North Carolina, and then eventually all the way up into Virginia. And that matches the map that we're looking at for the possibility of tornadoes well, because it was just extending into the very southern parts of Virginia. And I believe part of that extension was because of these little, I shouldn't say little thunderstorms, they look like they could end up being rather large, popping up right there in the southern parts of the state before it finally moves off into the Atlantic. So just looking at the rainfall, it's a similar story to, let's just go all the way through. By the time it extends out, that should be the end right there. This is showing a similar story to what was going on down here in Georgia, South Carolina, where directly underneath some of those thunderstorms, that's where you can get these strips of where you can get maybe an inch of rain. But it's very isolated. It almost looks like a tiger print right here, and you can just think of that as that's a thunderstorm moving up north and east. That's a thunderstorm moving up northeast. And as it moves, it drops that heavier rainfall. So there's selected strips where you get a half an inch to an inch of rain, but then there's some parts of the state that appear to get almost no rain whatsoever. So it's almost just complete randomness about where the storms are actually going to form and where you're going to get that heavy rainfall and the possibility of tornadoes. So this is one of the things that are one of the hardest things for the forecast models to predict, exactly where that convection is going to occur and cause these thunderstorms. So that again is where you have to just stay updated with your local resources, because they'll actually be following the actual storms themselves. But looking at the winds as they go through, that goes along with that vorticity map we were just looking at earlier, where it looks like the bullseye of that energy went right over North Carolina. Looks like that's going to be coming in the form of some extreme winds where we get 35 to even 50 mile per hour wind gusts moving through the state throughout this afternoon into tonight before it finally moves off into the Atlantic. So let's just take a closer look to see if we can identify some of the timing here. Looks like at about 10 a.m. this morning, it was just showing up on the very western parts of Virginia and North Carolina. And then as we get into this afternoon, we're going to start to see these move northeast. So While in parts of Alabama and Georgia, the storms seem to be moving almost east. That makes sense because the low pressure system, I think the best way to explain this would be this map right here. So showing this map right here, you can see that down here on the lower parts of the system, our winds are almost going straight west to east. So our storms are almost moving straight west to east. Whereas up here in North Carolina and Virginia, that's where our winds around this low pressure system are more northeast. So that's why these storms that we're looking at look more northeast as well. So just clicking right back there, you'll see some of those cells start to move northeast, and it actually matches up well with this as well, where you can I bet you could almost follow some of these systems right here and draw a line on this map, and it would probably match up with where some of these strips of 1 inch of rainfall are showing up throughout North Carolina and Virginia. But it looks like throughout this afternoon, the threat for severe weather seems to be just continuing and moving northeast through North Carolina and Virginia. I think the key spots to look out in North Carolina would be starting around maybe 12 p.m. through 1 p.m. all the way into maybe 5 to 8 p.m. We're still seeing some of those severe thunderstorms popping up throughout North Carolina. And then in Virginia, it looks like we're almost in the clear through about 2 p.m. And then we start to see some of that severe weather move into the state through the afternoon into 7 p.m. and even into tonight. Not looking like I shouldn't say we're in the clear by 12 a.m. on Friday, but it at least looks better than how it looks at about 7 p.m. That might be the key part where you're going to want to stay updated with all the local resources. So again, just to show you what's going on there, that low pressure system's moving through. It's bringing in this warm air that you can see with the red color there, and then it's also bringing in this moisture. It's bringing in that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Both of those things are combining to create that severe weather threat through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and as we just saw, even Virginia and West Virginia as well. So this could actually be a good place to transition and follow this storm as it starts going farther east and then finally moving off. So one thing I will mention here, because I wasn't actually planning to mention this, but it is one of the big stories that is going on today, as you saw on our warnings map, where we have this high wind warning in the Midwest. Wasn't going to mention this because I thought there was other things we should spend the majority of our time on, but there are going to be some strong wind gusts going through Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio today. Some of those associated with the possibility of some thunderstorms as well. If we look at some of these wind gusts, that's about 50 miles per hour going through Ohio as we get into this afternoon and this evening. And that seems to be continuing throughout the day before it moves off into the northeast. So wasn't originally expecting to say that, but that is another big part of the story that's going on today. The other big part of the story that I actually wasn't expecting, and I didn't mention this in yesterday's forecast, but what's going to be happening up here in the northeast as we track this low moving through. So right about there, that's getting into this evening and into tonight. You see the low right there, and you can actually see where that moisture and the cold air are combining in this almost perfect line right there that you see showing up. So it's right along that line that we're going to start to get some precipitation, because where you push in moisture and pull down cold air, again, that's almost just like squeezing water out of a sponge. But the one thing, I'm slowly getting to the key point I'm trying to make here. So the big change in the forecast is as that low moves through and we start to get some of that precipitation, we're actually also bringing down some of this cold below freezing air. You can quickly tell it's below freezing because it's this blue color here. And what that means is there's the possibility of snow. So I think there's two reasons for this below freezing air getting pulled down into the northeast and creating the possibility of snow. One, it's the circulation around a low pressure system. You can think of winds like to flow into a low, so there's the low down here in Virginia, so it makes sense that we're pulling some of that cold air down from Canada into the northeast. The other part of the story, and what's actually probably the bigger part of it, and what's bringing that cold air in, is this high pressure system that is extending into the Midwest and the Northeast as well. And I believe that's actually the main reason this cold air is being pushed into the region. It's this high pressure that we see filling in throughout the entire Midwest and Northeast. The reason I think that's the key factor going on here is because even in some of these places in North Dakota and South Dakota, where we actually have winds coming from Nebraska and Kansas, where it should be warmer, that cold below freezing air is still extending there. And so that makes me think it has to do with this high pressure system that's bringing that cold air in. So just looking at that another way, there's our low pressure system moving through, and then you start to see some of that snow pop up in parts of Pennsylvania, New York, working into southern New England before the low finally moves off the coast. So if we want to see that a closer way, first it shows up as rainfall. So that's important because this cold air hasn't filled in yet. So when this low is first moving through, you can see much of the Northeast is still above freezing. We're in the mid-30s to even the mid-40s in some places. So at first, this storm's just coming in as rainfall, and in some cases some heavy rainfall through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and parts of southern New England, maybe even the possibility of some thunderstorms there. Then, as we start to bring in some of that colder air, that's where we get this strip of snowfall going through Pennsylvania, New York, and then into Massachusetts, Vermont, and we'll see, it looks like very southern parts of New Hampshire get a little bit of that snow. Massachusetts looks like there's going to be some higher snowfall rates there before that system moves through. So it does look like a pretty quick mover in the time that we're getting that snowfall. It almost looks like 2 frames and then the system is gone. So looking at the total snowfall that we're able to build up there, it's maybe 1 inch to 2 inches in Pennsylvania, maybe 1 to 4 inches here in New York, and then parts of Massachusetts where we saw those heaviest snowfall rates that happened right about there. That looks to be about the strongest part of this snowfall rates and accumulations. That's where some of our totals could get to 2 to 5 inches. So it's certainly not a major snowstorm where we're getting a foot of snow or anything like that, but it's certainly worth mentioning because this wasn't something that I was originally expecting to see. It was the perfect combination of that high pressure system moving in at the exact same time the moisture is being pushed in to allow some of that snowfall to happen. So we already talked about some of those extreme winds that are going through the Midwest. You can see them right there in Ohio, 50 to 55 mile per hour wind gusts throughout the day today. It looks like the Northeast isn't going to be as strong as wind gusts, but we're certainly still going to be strong. I shouldn't say not as strong because we're still in the 30s and maybe even the 40 mile per hour wind gusts here throughout Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, even some parts of Maine before that system moves out. We could get some very strong wind gusts if some of that blob of energy were to move a little bit farther inland. And it looks like some parts of Massachusetts will actually be in that energy where there's the possibility of wind gusts greater than 55 miles per hour. So it almost is perfectly staying off the coast right there. And let's hope it does, because where you get 55 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts is where you can start to get some damages. So let's look at this as it comes through. Again, it first comes through as rain, which makes sense because that cold air hasn't been able to fill in yet. And in some cases, we're getting some heavy rain, but for the most part, it's just widespread and moderate through almost all of southern New England. Then let's see where this starts to transition to snow. It looks like the first little bits of snow start to show up 6 p.m. Thursday. Just to be sure, maybe the first little flakes start to show up about 5 p.m., but starts to grow by 6 p.m. and then continues to grow into 7 p.m. where we're still getting heavy rainfall in Massachusetts, but we're starting to pick up that snowfall here in New York. That's going to continue into 8 p.m. tonight, and then there should be a point in this graph where it becomes more widespread. that looks to be about 2 a.m. on Friday. That's where parts of New Jersey into New York, into Massachusetts, getting that heavier snowfall, and especially there in Massachusetts, where we see some heavier snowfall rates. That's going to continue into about 3 a.m. on Friday, where again, Massachusetts, where we have the possibility of getting 2 to 5 inches of snow, is certainly picking up the most and the strongest snowfall rates at about 3 a.m. this morning. So it looks like we're getting a couple little flakes here this evening into tonight, but the real bulk of that snowfall is coming in 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. So looking at the total accumulated snowfall, again, that goes along well with what we're just seeing right here in New York, where we're picking up the earliest amounts of snowfall, so we're able to pick it up for the longest period of time. That's where there's possibility of 2 to 4 inches forming right there. And then as we get into Massachusetts, that's where some of our totals could get up into the 2 to possibly 5 inch range, although Boston looking like 2 inches right there. And then New York City doesn't look like you're getting anything with this storm. And again, that's just because it is very select about where it's bringing some of that storm energy. It seems like that's the theme for the storm as it moves across the entire country. So again, the big story, and if you missed it, be sure to go back into the beginning of the video, because this is certainly the big story, the severe weather going through the southeast. It's the same severe weather that we got yesterday in Mississippi and Alabama that caused a couple dozen tornadoes. Now that is moving into Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even parts of Virginia. And while the threat, I don't think looks as large as it did yesterday. Yesterday looks about as bad as it can get. The threat does still exist. The Storm Prediction Center took it from a high risk of severe weather yesterday to down to a moderate risk for today. So the risk still exists. So that is the top story, and something you should especially stay updated with if you live in this region. Be sure to stay updated with your local resources there. So transitioning here, on the left side of the screen, here in California, you see some winter storm warnings starting to pop up. And this, I would say, is actually some great news, because last week when we were looking at the extended forecast, it was saying that California was going to be dry not only this week, but the next week, and then what looked to be, for the extended forecast, as far as you could even look, a month to 3 months out, California was expected to be completely dry. And as you can see, it looks like there's a storm coming in. So let's take a look at that next. As you start to see some of that rain fill in, it looks like it might actually already be starting to fill in some places. This is showing Thursday morning, some of that rain filling into Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and then that's going to continue throughout the day today, into Friday, into Saturday. Doesn't really even look like it's gone until Sunday morning. So to sum up this storm, there's no period. So looking at the severe weather going on in the eastern half of the country, that's a strong storm right there. That's why that was the top story for today. As this one comes in, you'll notice it looks quite different. It's just some light rain, some light snow, but it's lasting a lot longer. So while this strong storm here in the east moves off in about 24 hours, this one is going to be sticking around what appears to be all day today, all day Friday, even through Saturday, and then all the way into maybe even Sunday morning. We're still picking up some light rain and snow. So even though it doesn't look like a strong storm, it's a slow mover, so our totals are actually going to be pretty decent, as you'll see in a second. So there's that trough as it moves in. Again, you can see the difference between that and this storm. That right there, where you see these lines of constant pressure close together, that's a good indication that it is a very strong storm. Here, when it first comes in, we might have some close isobars where it first comes in as some extreme winds, but then you'll notice how far apart those bars get. And that just tells you there's not a big gradient in the atmosphere, so your winds aren't going to be that strong. You're not going to be pulling in all that much moisture rapidly like we're seeing down in the Gulf of Mexico right now. So not a strong storm, but again, you can see how slowly it moves across and then finally leaving as we get into Sunday. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the very tail of this system as it goes through Southern California. Right now, SoCal is not expecting too much with this system, but we'll have to stay tuned because there's always the chance that could turn into a little cutoff low and maybe bring some more rain to SoCal. That's something I'll certainly be watching out for. But the thing that's likely to happen is what's going on right now in the Pacific Northwest. That's that rain starting to build into the coast. You see, when the system first comes in, it almost just hovers along the coastline right here of Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and then it finally starts to bring some of that snow to the Cascades, and then moves all the way into Idaho and Montana as well. But throughout this entire time, it seems like we're constantly picking up some of that rain along the coast, and then right as we get into Friday, even into Saturday, that's where we're continuing to bring in some of that snowfall, especially up here in Washington. So and then it looks like it's gone by about Sunday. So looking at the total precip, you'll notice right along the coast where it looked like it was just constantly dropping rainfall, that's where we're getting maybe 2 to 3 inches. This is actually a little bit up from yesterday's forecast. Widespread though, I'd say we're more in that 1 to 1.5 inch range. Again, it doesn't look like a very strong storm, but there are some isolated regions where you see that red color there, where you're getting over 2 to possibly even 3 inches of rain. When it comes to the snowfall, this is another thing that has changed in the forecast. Yesterday, Washington wasn't expecting all that much with this storm. Now you can see the majority of the Cascades are expected to get 12 to 16 inches of snow. And then right here in the Olympic Mountains, that's where we're looking like we could be getting 2 to 3 feet of snow. So major update when it comes to that snowfall forecast for Washington. So let's take a closer look and see when that precipitation is going to be coming in. So looks like about 11 a.m. this morning, might be getting the first little traces already, but about 11 a.m. it's starting to really move into the western parts of the state. And then the first part of the system is mostly rain. We do see some periods at about 11 a.m. on Friday where we're getting heavy snowfall in the Olympic Mountains, but then where it starts to really build into the Cascades is around 5 p.m. on Friday. That continues into 11 p.m., into 5 a.m., 11 a.m. on Saturday, and then throughout most of the day Saturday, finally ending by about 11 p.m. Saturday night. So there's a pretty long period where we're picking up some snowfall. One second. So goes live streaming, right? I get lots of solicitors, so I just unplugged the phone. So looking at, hopefully it was nothing important. So looking at that snowfall as it builds into the Cascades, you can see where we did have that period where it was heavy snowfall in the Olympic Mountains. That's where there's the potential for 2 to 3 feet right there. But then in the Cascades, which we're only expecting 6 to 8 inches yesterday, now they're expecting maybe 12 inches to 16 inches. As you could see, it was able to pick up that snowfall for a long period of time. So let's look at the vorticity, and you could think of this as the storm energy as this system comes in. So we see that first little blast that's going to be coming in this afternoon into Friday. That's mostly bringing the rainfall with it. Then as this system settles over the region, that's where it starts to bring in the snowfall as well as we get into Friday and Saturday. Now, it almost looks like, especially when it comes to this storm energy, there's 2 key spots that I'm seeing. It looks like Washington has some of those locations of the strongest energy, and then Oregon almost misses out, and then it seems like it builds back up again here in California as that system moves through. And basically what that means is that it's going to be a stronger storm for Washington and California than it will be for Oregon. So taking a look at California, we can see that some of that rainfall starting to show up in the northern parts of the state already. And then we're going to start to build in some snowfall into the Sierras as we get into tonight and into Friday. Then again, one thing to just point out here though, it doesn't look like a major large storm. It looks like it's moderate rainfall, maybe some periods where we start to get some heavier rainfall in very isolated regions, but for the most part, just widespread rain, and then some widespread light snow as well. I would say that's honestly the best kind of storm to get because it usually doesn't lead to severe flooding or damages. It just slowly adds on some rainfall and some snowfall that we need when thinking about the drought or wildfire danger. And as I'm talking, I actually just looked out the window and it looks like we're starting to get the first little bits of rainfall in the South Bay, which actually goes along with this map pretty well. So great job to the scientists creating these forecast models. Now, as we look into Friday afternoon into Friday night, that's where we start to see some heavy snowfall building here into the Sierras. And that's actually right where I'm going to be driving at that exact same time. So I'm going to have to follow this model closely. One thing you notice though, for the most part, it looks like Southern California missing out with this storm, as I'll show in a second. So that's clicking through the precipitation that we're getting with this. Looks like there are parts in Northern California coast getting 1 to 2 inches of rain. And then throughout the central coast, it's about 0.1 to 0.3 inches. And then down here in Southern California, there's a good chance you're not going to be getting any rain at all. So looking at the snowfall, this is pretty similar to what some previous forecast models were showing, maybe a little less than previous forecast models. Looks like as of right now, for the most part, we're going to be getting 9 inches to maybe a foot of snow throughout parts of Northern California and the Sierras. Almost basically no snow whatsoever for Southern California. So let's actually look at the timing. Looks like some of this rain should have already started to show up by about 5 a.m. today. I would say, especially here in the South Bay and Santa Cruz Mountains, that wasn't exactly true, but by about 11 a.m., it looks like rain has spread out throughout much of Northern California, and I can attest to that because it is currently raining. So again, for the most part, moderate, light rain, but we do have these isolated areas where we get some heavier rainfall. If you're around Chico or Yuba City, you might get one of those stronger storm systems moving right over your location. And then you also see we start to bring in some of that snowfall into the Sierras, with the heaviest snowfall looking to be about 11 a.m. on Friday. That's going to continue into about 5 p.m. on Friday, with some possible ice where we have that boundary between rain and snowfall. So if you're like me and going to be driving right here at about 5 p.m. Friday, you should certainly keep your eye on the road, or possibly even not drive directly where this ice is going to be forecasted. And then that appears to be gone out of Northern California for sure by 11 p.m. on Saturday. Maybe still some light scattered rain and snow as late as 5 p.m. on Saturday. So looking at that rainfall as it comes in, I'll just click through. Looks like about half an inch to an inch of rain building in through the coast of Northern California. San Francisco, you're about 0.3 inches. San Jose, 0.3 as well. Great to see Santa Rosa now expected to get almost an inch of rain. That's more than previous forecast models, and great to see because that's one of our key places that I'm always looking at when it comes to wildfire danger. When it comes to the snowfall, we'll just click all the way through. Again, less than earlier forecast models were shown, but still select locations in Northern California and the Sierras that are picking up maybe 12 to 16 inches in some of those heavier spots, especially where we saw those heavier rates coming in. So I think that's the key spot to look out for when it comes to that snowfall that we're going to be getting over the next few days. I just also want to show Southern California to see how this storm is going to be coming in there, if it's going to even be coming in at all. Looks like around 5 a.m. on Friday to 11 a.m. on Friday, we're starting to get some of that rain working down into the central coast like Atascadero or San Luis Obispo, and then it tries to make its way down into Southern California. We might get some very scattered showers from Bakersfield to Los Angeles, possibly reaching down to San Diego, maybe 1 or 2 light showers, but for the most part, we're looking very dry in Southern California with this storm. If you need a better way to see that, you can see throughout the central coast, it's 0.1 to 0.4 inches of rain, and then throughout parts of Southern California, that's where we're likely just getting about 0.1 inch inches of rain at most. In most regions of Southern California, no rain whatsoever. So that's something I'll certainly be keeping my eye on as that storm moves through, because it looks like the forecast models still aren't 100% confident on what is going to happen. The exact numbers seem to be shifting around, so I'll certainly still continue to watch that as that storm develops. But first I want to do a quick forecast summary. The big story we're talking about today is that low pressure system moving through the southeast. It moved through Mississippi, Alabama yesterday. It brought all that severe weather, a couple dozen tornadoes, especially into places like Alabama. And that severe weather is going to be shifting east and northeast throughout the day today. So it's creating the possibility of some tornadoes through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even stretching all the way up into Virginia. It's also going to be bringing some high winds to the Midwest, and then eventually some snow to the northeast. That's something that wasn't expected, but it's the perfect timing of the moisture from this low mixing with the cold air from this high that's going to allow some of that snowfall to build into southern New England. So overall, I'd say it's going to be great news when this low pressure system finally moves off of the coast and into the Atlantic, because it's certainly created its fair share of damage throughout its path. But again, emphasizing one last time, as it moves through these eastern states today, be sure to stay updated with your local resources if you live in any of those regions. The other story we talked about is this new storm that's currently filling into Washington, Oregon, California. For the most part at the beginning, it's just going to be bringing coastal rain, and then as it starts to cool down Friday and Saturday, that's where we're going to start to bring in some snowfall into the Cascades and the Sierras, picking up over 12 to 16 inches of snow in parts of the Cascades of Washington, and then even in some select areas of the Sierras. So looking at the warnings map, you can see the warnings associated with that storm building into California. Got some winter storm warnings popping up right there already in NorCal, where some of that snow is already building in. And then some of those advisories and watches throughout the Sierras, I'm predicting will turn into watches over the next 24 hours. But again, the big story, what's going on down here in the southeast, where it shows the tornado watch through Florida, Georgia, but I'll show the Storm Prediction Center map in a second, which paints a better picture of where the severe weather threat's located. I also wanted to point out where we have those high wind warnings still in effect through Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and then also up here in the Midwest, where there's some gusts of 40 to 55 mile per hour winds possible. This, I think, is the key graphic to look at today. If you missed everything else throughout this entire video, this might be it, because this shows the probabilities of tornadoes. You can see it stretching from West Virginia and Virginia all the way down here into Florida. Where you're in that green and brown, that's just where there's a slight risk of tornadoes. Where you start to get into the yellow and red, that's where you're into the 10% to 15% and the moderate to high risk of some severe weather. And then especially where you see these checkerboard boxes within that yellow color there, that's where the Storm Prediction Center is predicting a possibility of strong tornadoes forming. So especially there from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even working into the very southern parts of Virginia. That's where you're going to want to stay updated with your local resources as those thunderstorms and severe weather move through this region throughout the day today, bringing extreme winds, possibility of hail, and as you can see here, the possibility of tornadoes as well. So it looks like we have about 5 minutes left, so I purposely put this at the end of the video to see if we had any time. This is just looking at the extended forecast. Everything we talked about is over the next 2 to 3 days. This map right here shows what's expected in the average of 6 to 10 days out. So from March 23rd to March 27th. And this is looking at the temperature probability. It looks like pretty clear pattern here. The western half of the country looks like it's going to be below average temperatures, or at least there's a high probability of below average temperatures, while much of California is actually right in that mild category. Where there's some more extreme temperature variations going on is over here in the northeast, and actually really the entire eastern half of the country. That's where there's a very high probability of these above average temperatures up here and throughout much of the Northeast 6 to 10 days out. So if we look at the precipitation probability 6 to 10 days out, looks like the greatest probability of precipitation is here in New Mexico, which is just fantastic to see because that is a location that's one of the locations in America that is in the worst drought. They have severe and extreme drought, and that's somewhere where I've been consistently forecasting for wildfire. One, because of that drought. Two, a lot of the fuels are dry. Three, they haven't been getting very many storms, so it's great to see their pattern might be shifting to a wetter pattern overall. More precipitation is expected for New Mexico. Great to see when it comes to the drought and wildfire danger in that area. We can also see some precipitation expected throughout Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, working up into the Ohio Valley. And just the broad look at this map, it looks like almost the entire central and eastern half of the country is expecting some precipitation in that 6 to 10 day forecast. Where it's expecting to be dry is here through California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, all the western states, which again would be bad news because we're also in that drought in California, Nevada, Utah. So this dry air certainly wouldn't help us, and especially here in Northern California where my major concern for wildfire always is, it looks like there is a high probability of just dry air. Now, one caveat I will say is this is what this map was showing up as last week. And as it turns out, we've got a storm coming in over the next couple of days. So forecast models are subject to change. They can always be wrong. So in this case, let's actually hope they are wrong because I would certainly like to see a couple more storms throughout March to build up some of that good rainfall and snowfall that we need both in our water supply, drought, and wildfire danger. So looking at the 8 to 14 day temperature probability outlook, looks like the majority of California is expected to be in that warm air, and then that warm air should be continuing from the southeast up into the northeast as well, with the northeast high probability of being above average temperatures. Some of that colder air starts to shift in to the central parts of the country, again, between March 25th and March 31st. When it comes to the precipitation, again, it looks like the west is in that dry pattern, while the southeast working into the northeast appears to be in that area expected to get some precipitation. So again, not exactly the news we want to see when it comes to precipitation, especially up here in Northern California where there's not only extreme drought but also that wildfire danger. But again, this is what it was saying last week, and we've got a storm currently on the way. So the only way to know what's actually going to end up happening is by following the weather forecast every day, and that's exactly what we do. So if you like staying updated with the weather forecasts, you can subscribe to this channel where I try to do these forecasts every single day. Hopefully this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.